How much should a game's design be able to impact your strategy while you play it? Well, let's discuss by shedding some light on dark domains. Hey there, and welcome to my initial thoughts on Dark Domains, which is a worker placement game in which each player takes on the role of a city leader, working diligently to expand the king's empire. However, unbeknownst to the monarchy, these city leaders are secretly evil, and they have vowed their allegiance to a sinister necromancer who has morbid ambitions. Whoops. And so, to give the facade of increasing the domain of the royal family, the players will gather resources and construct pleasant little civic buildings. But, as mentioned, this is all a ruse, and each of these helpful structures will eventually be tainted by the player that's constructing them, converting them into a bastion of villainy that serves their dark overlord. The more evil that the section of the kingdom controlled by the player becomes, the more it will need to be defended against the do-gooding adventurers who are questing along the landscape looking for wrongs to right and evil to vanquish. In the end, only the player who has developed a domain that produces the most evil will accomplish their mission and win the favor of this vile necromancer that they serve. They'll do this through the strategic use of minions, henchmen, monsters, and magic spells to stamp out the good, repel the altruistic adventurers, and cover their land in darkness. Now, as you may have guessed by the title of this video and the fact that I'm holding the box, I recently played Dark Domains, and I found this to be a game with some pretty interesting twists on the whole worker placement genre. But those twists did not come without challenges of their own. This is a game that can be very, very brutal, and it just doesn't care what you think about that. And while those challenges are admittedly part of the fun, they also could become an unexpected obstacle that prevented some players from enjoying the game as much as they were hoping to. I feel I should explain. So, to explain, we need to start at the beginning with the setup of the game. Now, I am a firm believer that most people, including myself, are going to learn how to play this game by reading its rulebook. Now, you know what? As I was going through this rulebook, I thought that this was actually a pretty well-written one overall. There were just a few things in here that required additional sussing out as I was going through the game. And as my experience with modern board game rulebooks go, well, it's pretty much par for the course. In fact, while I was reading this particular rulebook, I do remember thinking, wow, hey, this is pretty well written. You know, I am understanding the concepts that this printed page is trying to convey to me. Adequate job, rulebook. Adequate job. There were, of course, some exceptions, however, such as how the various decks that are used in the game are described but not specifically shown in this rulebook. These decks need to be constructed in a very specific way, and it took some deductive reasoning on my part to figure out how to actually set up a couple of those decks. But gameplay-wise, most of the game's mechanisms were explained really well and were actually pretty darn intuitive. There were just a couple of things that I needed to double check in the old rulebook when we encountered them during the course of the game. Now, these were typically mechanisms that had an element of branching decision making that were incorporated into them to increase the game's unpredictability and replayability. While that is cool and neat, it did require me to stop and ask, how does that work again? Just 1 second while I look up how this thing functions. Some examples would be good. Okay, well, here's one. An example would be how the adventuring party's order of operations was carried out. What kind of buildings or other things in the game they target, and how you kind of determine that, and how monster placement on buildings worked. All of those things required revisiting the rulebook when we got to those points in the game. It was explained in the rulebook, but in practice it just didn't click automatically until we played through it, a couple of times. Don't get me wrong though, I mean, these are not complaints. These are just common wrinkles that one encounters with a game with this many moving parts. These little hiccups are not anything unique to this particular game, and I don't hold any of these things against it. Nope, not at all. Not complaints. If you do want legitimate complaints, well, I'll give you legitimate complaints. The primary criticism about Dark Domains that I have seen and read online was that this game gives the presentation of a worker placement Eurogame, but then hides random luck-driven elements under its Eurogame veneer, making some players feel that the game itself is much like its Royal City planners, who seem fair and balanced on the surface, but secretly have a heart of chaotic darkness inside. That's not a bad analogy. Oh, I should have used it in this video. Players are able to make their own plans and gather resources, all they want, but they're also going to need to contend with unpredictable dice rolls when they defend the structures that they've built, and the turmoil that can be triggered by cards that determine the player's collective fate each round. These are things that players have no control over, and they don't care how you feel about them. They're going to do what they want to do, and by gum, if it messes up you and everyone else's plans, well then so be it, because these are mechanisms that have just no soul, and they don't have your best interests at heart sometimes, and the pain. Now, then don't get me wrong, I don't usually mind some random mayhem in my life. I like some controlled chaos in my games. So rolling dice to defend my building against the adventuring parties wandering across the countryside didn't really bother me that much. Because when it came to that aspect of the game, I went in knowing what to expect. But then, during our first game that we played, we also encountered some really just bad luck that made the first game a real challenge. And to be honest, it left a bad taste in the mouth of some of the players. You want to know what happened? Well, all right. Let me share with you my sad tale of woe. First off, it must be explained that the game uses many decks of cards. There's your buildings that you can buy, there's your henchmen for hire, there's an annoying adventure party who will come along and disrupt the den of iniquity that you're constructing, there's spells you can cast, and there's fate cards that set special rules that govern each round. A lot of cards. At the beginning of each round, a couple of these fate cards are pulled from a deck and their special rules are revealed and put into effect for that round. Now each player starts the game with several workers and 8 coins at their disposal, which they will then use to take actions and obtain resources. Now the very first round of the very first game that we played, the very first fate card that was turned over and put into effect caused each player to lose 2 of their 8 coins. And then the second fate card caused each player to lose 3 more, reducing each player from 8 down to 3 coins to use in the very first round of the game. But no, that's fine. That's a challenge, and none of us are really going to make much progress this very first round, but at least we're all in the same boat. Then, at the end of that first round, a player cast a spell that caused everyone to lose the rest of their gold. Alright, so now nearly all of us are flat broke, but at least we'll still be able to use our workers to take actions and start building up our resources again, So we can do this. Then the fate cards for the second turn were revealed, and the first of those required all players to pay a gold for each worker that they wanted to use that round, effectively preventing anyone from being able to do anything that second round. All due simply to the luck of the first cards that were drawn in the game, something that the players were powerless to prevent. Now, to be fair, many of the cards in this Fate deck actually have positive results for the players, and the odds of these particular cards coming out in this particular order is pretty darn slim. It's a big deck of cards that's randomized each game. And this unfortunate series of events could easily have been mitigated further simply by removing those cards from the deck completely. There'd still be plenty of other cards available. But going into that very first game, we didn't know what to expect. And when that series of events did happen, well, it was admittedly a bit of a drag for everybody. So am I saying that I hated the experience, I detested this game, and I'm planning on donating my copy of it to someone who I secretly dislike? No, absolutely not. The next plays of the game that we did, didn't have this problem. But I can't help but wonder if part of what made these subsequent plays better was that I also knew what to expect going in. And while I certainly would play it again, this game does benefit greatly from knowing what can happen before you go into it, and being in the mood for the possibility of an unpredictable and also unpredictable, perhaps punishing game session. Like that sentence, unpredictable and punishing. And of course, speaking as someone who is now an expert in Dark Domains, I can attest that I have seen how games can vary due to the fate, henchmen, and spell cards that become available over the course of the game, and I know myself how to prepare myself mentally for those potential outcomes and go into the game with that certain appropriate mindset. Yes, certain. That's what experts say. Certain. And you know, needing to be in a certain mood for a particular game, well, you know, that's not a bad thing. You know, it's just something to be aware of. Many games on gamer shelves benefit from being in the right mindset and the mood for that particular game. So again, this is not something that is just specific to Dark Domains. It's just something to be aware of. So is Dark Domains a game that is worth our time when we have all of these other games at our disposal to choose from these days? Well, this is a game that has some pretty neat ideas that put some really interesting twists on the whole worker placement genre. But admittedly, this is a game that's not going to be for everyone. You know, if you do not want that chaos or that unpredictability, you know, you're probably going to want to stick with a more deterministic Euro. But knowing what you now know going into all of this, if this is a game that does sound like you would enjoy, well, then I would definitely recommend trying it out. And if it turns out that you like it, the game can be purchased directly from its publisher, Laboratory H, right now up until after Gen Con the first week of August. After Gen Con, the game's going to go into distribution, which will require fulfillment to go through some different channels and may actually reduce its availability for a while. So if you want to give the evil in your wicked little heart a chance to fully blossom into the deceitful butterfly that we all know it can be, well, check out the Laboratory H website, link in the description below, before Gen Con to get a copy of Dark Domains using their pledge manager on their page. Regardless of whatever the heck you decide to do with your life, I do think that Dark Domains is worth giving a try, and perhaps 2 tries, in order to really get the feel for the unique mechanisms and experience that this game offers. Now, I hope that this overview of the results of my first few plays of the games has been helpful, and until next time, I've been Chaz Marler from Pair of Dice Paradise. I'm done talking, so take care.